Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Eucatastrophe podcast, a place where I share my thoughts with you, discuss certain things that are on my mind, maybe in the news, things that I've been dwelling on, and other such things, good books that I've been reading, or I've got a few things lined up. This is only the second episode of the podcast. And today, we'll discuss, something that I've been talking about, or something I've been thinking about lately, at least. But I'll get to that in a moment. So a little bit about me, because this is only the second episode. I am an ordained minister with the Christian Missionary Alliance Church. Served as a pastor in that denomination, also as a missionary working in a foreign country, and so had those experiences. And I plan to use this platform to share, like I said, to share thoughts, ideas, discuss maybe a good book I've read, also interview some people, so a whole smattering of things, just to really, perhaps more for me than for you, to be able to express some of the things that are going on in my mind. Anyways, I went on vacation last week with my family. We had a wonderful time, just getting to spend some time with each other in the beautiful Osoyoos region of BC, and it was. For the most part, it was sunny. We had some rainy days, but they were okay. It just allowed us to kind of stay inside and laze around, which was good. That's always good to do that. But now we're back, and life will get going again. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is what we've seen in the last number of years within evangelicalism, and I'm speaking, that kind of as someone who is not outside of that world, but in evangelicalism, I think more, at least I've been more aware of that, kind of more the free church stream within what might be called as, the big tent of evangelicalism, or what is being called now Big Eva. But people, former pastors now, or worship leaders, Christian leaders, going through a deconstruction process. And that is, that's, to me, that is, I've wrestled a bit with that, watching people do that, and especially because it seems to be happening. I mean, we live at a time when, everything is very public because of social media. Like right now, I'm just sitting here with a microphone and a video camera, and I'm sharing my thoughts with you. So everyone is able to broadcast widely. And one of the things that we've seen is people kind of broadcasting the deconstruction of their faith or other things that they go through in life, and just making it very public. And on one hand, I can understand that. On the other hand, I think there does need to be... It can seem irresponsible, perhaps. And I think irresponsible in terms of Christian leaders doing that. I think that if you're walking through everybody, regardless of whether you're a brand new Christian or a Christian leader who has served in pastoral ministry, or a seminary professor, everybody walks through doubt. Everybody has doubts, and that is perfectly normal and common for Christians to experience that, and to have that, to have doubt in their thoughts. I think it's problematic when a leader begins to express those doubts in the public sphere, in what am I trying to say? In the public sphere, perhaps even as they go through them, maybe they're having a serious time of doubt in wrestling, and so they're broadcasting that. I don't want to say that it's wrong for a person to come forth and say, I have left my faith. I now reject this. I think that's obviously a very serious conclusion for a person to come through. They've obviously worked through quite a bit. Hopefully they have sincerely worked through their doubts and come to that conclusion. I think that there's legitimacy in that. There seems to be, big evangelicalism or whatever is much like, and I know I might sound harsh or critiquing here, and maybe I am, and you can fault me for that. It is a lot like Hollywood. We like our big name people, right? We like the mega church. We like that kind of stardom. We have that kind of culture. For good or bad, you decide. But and so, in that, whether we like it or not, that does a lot to shape our leaders who find themselves in those positions. And it would be silly for any pastor at any point to ever say that they do not wrestle with the wanting the approval of men, whether that comes through, being told you're a wonderful preacher or teacher, that that feeds that thing. We like that. And obviously, the more exposure you get, the more of that you will receive. And so I think that in some ways, those who are used to that will broadcast their deconstruction because they're craving, even in that process, the attention. And I there's something that doesn't sit well with me. And then there's something further from some of the other things that I have heard from certain people who have, gone through that or have left the faith recently. There was a stint there, I think maybe a year or two ago. It was before COVID, so man, that seems like forever ago. 2 years ago, where there seemed to be a stint of maybe Christian musicians that were kind of distancing themselves from Christianity, saying they've lost their faith. And I remember listening to one of them talk, and sorry, I didn't do my research here, and I should have. I can get the name for you, but the worship leader former worship leader was talking about how he came to a point where he was grappling with some big questions, and one of those big questions was about suffering and the presence of evil, and the problem of evil, which is a very, very common problem to wrestle with, and one that you should spend time wrestling with. But the comments from this particular person were, and the church couldn't give me any answers, and so yada yada yada. He continued on his way, and he said he'd never heard any of these things talked about. He had never heard any of these things discussed in his church. And so he couldn't get any answers. And that to me is, number one, it's shocking to hear someone say that. It's shocking to hear a worship pastor say that. And my initial question that came to my mind was, what church do you attend? What denomination do you belong to? And how have you not heard these things discussed? Because it's one of the questions that the Christian church has wrestled with since its inception, dealing with these things, and it has, in my estimation, some very good answers for those. They might not be satisfying all of your logical needs, but there's very good answers for things like the problem of evil, or if you want to say if we say something other than answers, there's at least some very deep, thoughtful wrestling and thoughtful written works of people who have wrestled with that can at least provide some initial ways to think about those problems. So to hear someone say that they never heard these things talked about, they never heard any answers, it's sad. It's sad because the Christian tradition, the Christian faith, offers deep answers to those pressing questions, for sure. Which brought me to something else. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, anyone who's has any familiarity with the Bible knows that there's a lot of genealogies. There's a lot of history there. So that brings you to the understanding that, look, history is important, right? It's at the very least, one of the things that we can deduce from that is that, that to know history is important, and that the present is linked to the past. There is a history there that you are connected to, and that God, and it shows that God has been working at work through all of it. And that's important to recognize. It's important to understand that there's a continuous work of God in history, and especially with his church, right? That's like, why am I even saying this? Because I think that many evangelicals, and I'll say in my experience, and this might not be true across the board, but in my experience, I have run into many evangelicals that do not realize that the church has a history I shouldn't say realize. They don't seem to care, perhaps, or they're not interested, or they're just oblivious. It's not on their radar that the church has a history that goes beyond, the foundation of their local church, or the foundation of their denomination. As if, let's stretch it back to say, like, a person who founded a denomination 100, 200 years ago was, they were where the true church started. I don't think anybody has that particular kind of view, but I do think that people don't necessarily think it important to think beyond that scope, that the church is ancient, and that we all have connections where it's connected. There's a continuity there, and you're part of something bigger. And I think that there's that, because of that, because evangelicals, and again, especially in the free church tradition, we seem to be very narrowly focused, that history is just not something that we tend to appreciate the way that we should, especially church history. I think that has led, it's one of the things that creates this crisis of identity for evangelical Christians. And I'm not saying it's the end all and be all of everything, but we seem, ancesterless. We don't have any roots, it seems. So there's this, on one sense, there's this freedom to wander and then on the other hand, in another way, it is debilitating because we wander. And we don't feel anchored to anything ancient. And because of that, one of the outcomes of that is we're always innovating. And of course, there's a church growth movement, which we could say lots about, and its style and what it says about promotion, all this stuff. But there's this, we are, I think what feeds underneath that is there's a rootlessness, there's not anchored to anything, and so we're always innovating, and we always offer innovation. And that's not always good. I think there's a sense, again, we need to be innovative in the way that we can take the gospel to the world. We want to see people come to the gospel, come to understand who our Lord and Savior is. All of those things are important, and they require us thinking at times outside of the box as to how we can do that. At the same time as innovation is important, being rooted to that true and to the truth and the past is also extremely important. I think the Bible bears witness to that. And I think we often spurn the past as being somehow inadequate, that we can do it better now, that there's nothing we can learn from the past, or the ways that they used to do things in the past are just not sufficient anymore. And I think I think we need to check that. I think there's things that we need to be thinking about a little more deeply when it comes to that. And I'm not advocating, please don't hear me, I'm not advocating for evangelicals to start to find a church that claims ancient pedigree, that claims to be rooted all the way back to the apostles or further. That's not what I'm saying, and I don't want to be, you don't want to hear me, but I do think it's important that evangelicals start to get a little, I'm speaking in broad terms here, that we should be very interested in the past, in church history, to know what those disciples who have gone before us have walked through and what they have learned and what they can teach us. And that church history is our family history. And although it can be difficult to read, although it can be ugly to read, it is also beautiful. It is also encouraging and challenging, and you learn through it, right? You learn. The church has battled through all kinds of theological dilemmas over the years. There's nothing new under the sun. In the ancient church, our fathers in the faith have a lot to say to us and to teach us. And it gives us a perspective that you don't have if you don't know the family history. And I just think it's something that is important, that we should be focused on, because it helps anchor us. It helps give us perspective, and it will. I think we need to not, or I would like to remedy or see a remedy somehow to help us understand we're part of something greater than ourselves, that our local church that we go to, that we love, the true church, if I could say that. And there's the terms the visible and the invisible. For the invisible church, that of all believers of all time, the true church, that we're part of that. We're part of that grand movement, and to be part of that movement, you ask the question, well, how do I become part of that true church? Well, you could say all kinds of things, and part of the answer, if you're kind of, you look to be connected to the past, but how are you part of the true church that has existed through all time? Well, I think that at the very least, this is what we can say: to be a member in that true church, that they are God's people who are always cloaked, or always marked by the righteousness of faith, right? That I think that is the hallmark of how you know you're a member in the true church, is that you are marked by the righteousness of faith, that seizes Christ by faith, that is in him, clothed in him. And that is the marks, at the very least, and I would say most important, that is what marks you as a member of the true church. And therefore you have a long family history that goes well beyond your local congregation, which is important. And I could talk about that too, but just understanding that you're part of something much more, and get a feeling that you're not some rootless orphan. I don't want to use a term that might get too misunderstood within the biblical use of that word too, but you're not an orphan wandering around with no genealogy, with no past, but we're almost like that as evangelicals. I think we feel like orphans, and we don't know exactly where we've come from, how we've gotten to here, and who has gone before us. And I think it's really something special, and it's God ordained that we should feel connected and know our past. And so I just, I think that it's something to think about. It's something to ponder, and to appreciate. I think we need to learn to appreciate the past, and we need to learn to listen to the past. We need to learn from the past. And I think in some ways, and of course, the whole issue of deconstruction is deep. I find it troubling and sad. But I think there's an element to it where evangelicals often come to a place where they feel rootless, where they all of a sudden see that there's other ways of doing things that they had no idea about. It rattles them. It can shake them. And then there's questions that come with that. And that's part of the turmoil of all of a sudden realizing that, there's this thing that I'm part of is much greater than I have, and I know nothing about it. And so I think that I guess the encouragement here is to open up church history, begin to read it, and to learn from it. Like I've said, like the church is the bride of Christ, right? The people of God are the bride of Christ. They have, Christ has ordained, instituted the church. We are all members of his body. It's this beautiful thing, right? My Eucatastrophe, the podcast, it always wants to, however ugly my rambling just was, and however incoherent it was, and if I didn't make any sense to you whatsoever, whatever disaster that was, and maybe I messed a whole bunch of things up, let's just take a turn here for the good here, that whatever catastrophe here, at least it led us to this, that Christ has bled and died for his church. And that church has a long history of moving from immature, right? The Bible talks about the church moving from immaturity to maturity. Let's look at that history that we belong to. Let's look at our family's past where it has matured so that we ourselves can be mature, that we can be more mature. And so there's the good news that we land on. We always, thankfully remember that Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ will come again, and he is going to come again and redeem and call his church to himself, right? Collect his bride. So that's my ramblings, and I know I didn't write it out. I thought I was going to write something out and have it a little more thought out, but I just started filming and talking, and that's what's come out. So I think that's probably what I'll post. If you were able to stick with that and listen, well, thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful week coming up here, and that you're blessed. And I will be posting again soon, hopefully. And so until then, may God bless you. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.